Hello, welcome to my channel Tall Talks from a Short Lady. This is the third video on how to write a formal report, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the main body of a long formal report. In this case, I'm using an examinational report and specifically a survey-based report. So, what does the long report look like? I've already spoken about the prefatory part. It has the core part and the appended part. Today, I'm going to be looking at the core part in this video. So, what to include in the main body? The main body starts with the introductory chapter. It moves on to specific chapters and specific titles depending on your report topic. It also has a chapter on survey findings, as it is a survey-based report, and the last chapter always is the summary and conclusion. So starting with the introduction. The first chapter is labeled as introduction for all reports. You do not have any freedom to label it as anything else. Now, the subsections of the introduction is very formulaic. That means, again, you have to keep to the specific titles. You cannot get creative here. Neither can you skip on any of the subsections. Please note that you have to use the third person indirect. Try and keep it brief. So I will go ahead and read out the sample that I've given here, taken from one of the reports prepared by my students last year. The heading, as I said, has to be Introduction. Please note that it is chapter 1. This chapter establishes the purpose, premises, and background of the survey report. The first subsection is always called the origin of the report. Here, you talk about the reason why you embarked upon preparing this report. This survey report was prepared as a part of the third year engineering syllabus for the subject of business communication and ethics by the students of the computer department of Tadumul Engineering College, affiliated to the University of Mumbai. So now that you've given the reason why you prepared the report, the next is to state the purpose of the report. Please start the sentence with the words, "The purpose of this survey report was to look into the attitude of the Indian people towards the idea of men wearing makeup and cross-dressing in public." The next subsection is the scope of the report, which talks about the coverage of the report. The scope of this survey is restricted only to the subcontinent of India. Now, the southern people who were surveyed were all from India, and hence the scope is limited only to India. The next subsection, I've called it the research question and hypothesis. This subsection is not a part of a report, but I encourage my students to get into the spirit of research, and I request them to treat the report as a research project. Hence, I encourage them to use a research question and hypothesis. The research question. Are the Indian people tolerant and accepting towards the idea of men dressing unconventionally and wearing makeup in public? This is the question they posed. Now, if you answer the research question, you get your hypothesis. I'm reading the hypothesis. Due to a closed mindset and strict adherence to conventional practices, Indians are not very accepting of men dressing unconventionally and wearing makeup in public. Now, this is the claim that my students have made. With the help of the statistical data, they will either be able to prove their hypothesis as right or wrong. You must add 1 or 2 lines before you go to any subsection, and here you will notice that before I jump to 1.1, I have inserted a sentence here which talks about what is 1. I have highlighted in red the 4th subsection. This is not mandatory for a report, but it would be a good idea for practice for all the students. Continuing with the introduction, the 5th component or subpart of the introduction are the limitations that were faced while preparing this report. I'll read out for you. The following limitations were faced while preparing the survey report. The sample size is too small. In fact, 1,000 is no number at all. Only people who can read English and are computer savvy could be included in the survey because it was done through a Google form. The number of questions in the survey had to be limited to hold the attention span of these subjects, so not a very in-depth study could be done. The truth value of the answers given by the subjects could not be checked, and the last limitations that my students faced were that the time that could be devoted to the research was less as there were other subjects too to focus on. The next subsection is the background of the report. Here you post a short one paragraph or maybe two paragraphs to establish a little bit of a background on the topic. I will not read the subsection. I will skip to the next subsection, which is the sources and methods of data collection. Now, since it is an examinational report, almost 90% of the data collected was primary. So the primary source and method of data collection. The people of India were the primary source of first-hand data. A Likert scale-based survey questionnaire was used to collect data through online circulation. This is the method. Now, the students also had to use a little bit of secondary data, and the method of collection is direct reference, so I'll just go ahead and read it. The background information for Chapter 2 was taken from various websites, books, magazines, and newspapers. The direct method of referencing was used to access the secondary data. Moving on to Chapter 2, from here you start giving specific title to your chapters depending on the topic that you have. In this case, the students have labeled it as Tracing the Origin of Men's Fashion. You need to follow the same sequence of headings and subheadings as mentioned in the table of contents and use the funneling technique, which is you move from general information to specific information. So let me just go ahead and read out from the sample. This chapter looks at the concept of men's fashion and goes on to trace the changing face of men's fashion through the ages right up to the current day. The last part of this chapter funnels down to a closer look at men's fashion tastes and standards, and specifically they're talking about the Indian men. So the starting 2.1 is a generic definition of fashion, then 2.2 talks about men's fashion around the world, so it has subdivided into the Middle Ages, maybe then the modern age, and then the current age. I will not go more into details. Now, the third chapter in this case is the survey findings, because one chapter was enough to cover the background on this topic. So the second chapter was devoted to the background, and my students could move to the third chapter, which will be the survey findings. Now, use a matrix to provide the description of the survey, and here I'm going to be reading out. Also, before I read out, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the table has to be labeled on top, unlike the charts and figures which are labeled at the bottom. So, reading out from this sample, this chapter presents the core findings of the survey. First, it talks about the survey design, and then it moves to the actual statistical graphs derived from the collected data. Now, this chapter has two subsections. 3.1 talks about the survey description. Given below is the description of the survey in a tabular format. Total number of surveys that were done were 1,000. The mode of survey was online questionnaires. Type of questions were close-ended questions only. Some were Likert scale based, some were bipolar, and some were simple MCQs. The total number of questions used in the survey were 8. The time taken was 30 days to collect all the 1,000 questionnaires. The location was all over India, and the software used were Google Forms and Microsoft Excel to calculate the collected data. Now, the second subsection here is the statistical analysis of the survey data. The data collected was analyzed using Microsoft Excel and converted into various graphical form. Each question has been displayed on a new page, starting with the question, the graph, and the verbal inferences that were drawn. So I'm going to show you on the next page how they have used a separate question on each page, the graph, and then the written analysis. Here is an example of how the students have placed one question, then the graph on the basis of the data collected, and the written analysis of what they understood from this graph. Here is one more example for you. This is the second question. Please note that each question is placed on a fresh page. This is the graph and the other inferences that they have drawn. The last chapter of the main body is the summary and conclusion. Again, like the introduction, the title of this chapter remains summary and conclusion. You cannot get creative with it. The inferences drawn from the graphs, in a nutshell, is the summary. Now, the end summary is different from the executive summary. The executive summary talks about the entire report in a nutshell. It talks about why you did it, how you found the data, and what did you find. Whereas the end summary talks about only what did you find through your statistical data. Answering the research question and proving the hypothesis is your conclusion, so it is very easy to write the conclusion. Use bullet points for both summary and conclusion if possible. It is easier for people to read. So I will just go ahead and read a little bit from the sample. This chapter first summarizes the survey findings and then moves towards drawing valid conclusions based on the statistical calculations given in chapter 3. So here in bullet points, they have given their findings, and this is the conclusion. I have not given the entire conclusion. You can see how they start by saying, in conclusion, it can be said that the initial hypothesis that was proposed was proved to be correct to a great extent, and I'm not going into further details. With this, I come to the end of this video session. For more videos on this topic, please refer to the description box below. The name of my channel is Tall Talks from a Short Lady, and with that, I will say thank you and bye.